All right, get in here. We have a lot to talk about. There's a new movie about Ronald Reagan. There's a new season of Only Murders in the Building. There's a lot happening in the world of pop culture. The group chat is here to talk about all of it. So settle in. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. All right, look, it's the end of the week. It means it's time for us to talk about the big pop culture stories of right now. We are going to get into that new season of Only Murders in the Building in a minute, but I think the bigger story, the surprising story, is that there is a new biopic out about probably one of the most impactful, but also one of the most controversial figures in American history. There's a new Ronald Reagan movie out. Such an interesting time, I think, for this movie to be landing. Rachel Ho is here, Simonpillai is here, and for the first time, Adam Nayman is here. Adam, Rachel, Rad, welcome to the show, y'all.
Hello.
Hello. I'm delighted that everybody's here. All right, why don't I play you a bit of the trailer for the Reagan movie?
I'm curious, Ron.
What would you say is the issue of our time?
No question about it. Communism and the Soviet Union.
Get in the game. Run for office.
It's you.
I'm running for governor, and I would like your vote.
I forgot your name.
Do his initials help, or R?
Honey, Roy Rogers is here.
All right, let me just set up Reagan a bit. You have Dennis Quaid playing Reagan, who's, of course, an actor who becomes the president of the United States. Adam, you wrote a piece for The Ringer this week about how Reagan remains this large, commanding figures in the American imagination, yet Hollywood has really struggled to tell his story in TV and film. Can you just give us a bit of background here? What makes Reagan such a tricky character to capture on film?
Well, because he's a creature of film, right? I mean, this is someone who came out of a really sort of glorious time for Hollywood when Hollywood was shaping, I think, real fantasies about American life. And then he helped actually shape a fantasy of American life as a politician. He drew on all that iconography. I mean, he was trying to make America great again before that was a hat. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that he was really good at it. He's very charismatic. He's very good at playing himself. He's an actor. So how do you get an actor to play him? Mm-hmm. And the last time that they tried to make a movie about him really was that TV miniseries, The Reagans, which came out in such a polarizing moment when the right was really mad about liberal Hollywood skewering George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And there were just a lot of complaints that CBS shouldn't air a show that criticized Nancy Reagan, that quoted Ron talking about, the AIDS epidemic and in a disparaging way. That show kind of got pulled, where it got shunted by CBS down to a smaller network. It was like Reagan's very Teflon, right? Mm-hmm. And so, of course, when someone tackles him again 20 years later, it's like a Marvel movie for people who think books should be banned in schools. It's the most sort of the most kind of superhero origin myth treatment of him, which is what the people who are going to go see a movie like Reagan want to see. And then for the rest of us, it's just like kitsch. It's like Stalinist kitsch, but it's American.
I mean, the idea of drawing the comparison to a Marvel movie for people who think books should be banned, you're getting at an iconography. Like Reagan represents something. There's a sort of an idea of Reagan that has kind of persisted throughout time. Do you want to talk about why his presidency was maybe significant from a pop culture point of view?
Yeah. You can't talk about his presidency without invoking movies, right? The missile defense program was called Star Wars. He watched Rambo and said, next time I know what to do, in terms of there being a sort of foreign crisis. Even his assassination attempt is based on a movie. It was a guy cosplaying Taxi Driver because he wanted to impress Jodie Foster. I mean, that's right. Even without talking about Reagan's career, which is completely mediocre as an actor, he's a B-list leading man. He was like an A-list witch hunter, and someone who really had an amazing ability to, again, shape those fantasies. So it was a very a kind of movie star presidency. Morning in America evokes all the imagery of those Spielberg movies from the early 80s. Not that Spielberg's a conservative.
You're talking about the speech Morning in America. Yeah.
The speech Morning in America, the iconography Morning in America, the idea of a kind of bright, optimistic time overlaid on incredible, not just political division, but political manipulation. Like this isn't something a movie critic talks about, but historians would talk about activating the religious right and deepening those divisions between right and left and changing what the idea of a kind of conservative-facing politician looks like in America. He did that because his command of pop culture was, in some ways quite brilliant. And that's someone who's been on camera for his whole life, who knows how strong Hollywood is, and who wasn't afraid. And this to make those connections, you think now with this new Reagan movie, the posture of everyone involved in it is to criticize Hollywood elites and say, this is the kind of movie Hollywood doesn't want you to see. Reagan was a Hollywood elite. He was someone who came out of that same dream factory, mobilized it to his ends. And it's funny, and I'm sure everyone else is going to talk about this. The movie is both completely enthralled him, like it's a completely hagiographic movie, but it's also so pathetic compared to the standards of even like mainstream filmmaking. It's cheap, it's low budget, it's got, almost no production values to it, which I think speaks to the power imbalance in Hollywood, because Hollywood is more liberal left. And this is sort of the loyal opposition now.
It's funny to me that people always mention, Ronald Reagan and say he was the first American president to be an actor. They can't name a movie he's ever been in. Like, that is not a part of the way that people talk about Ronald Reagan. I want to talk about some of the things that Adam just brought up, Rachel. But the idea of this movie, because I think what Adam just laid out, frankly, sounds like a more interesting movie to me than the movie that is now out in theaters at this moment. So the framing for this film is kind of strange. It's just like narrated by a fictionalized former KGB officer played by Jon Voight here. What story is this film actually trying to tell about Reagan?
It's a good question, because it's one of those things where Jon Voight, I understand Reagan's connection with the Cold War, with the Berlin Wall. So I get the, trying to bring in a KGB agent. I feel like Jon Voight was kind of there just to fill in the gaps when they weren't able to find like a good seamless a good transition between different parts of his life. And they just thought, we'll throw Jon Voight in there to like do his thing. But for me, it was just like, it was like watching a Wikipedia page get acted out. Like, I don't know if I really know Reagan. I do know. I don't know Reagan, the man, any better than I did before watching this movie. I know more of like the key points of the events that he was, not popular for, I shouldn't say popular for, but that he was known for. But I don't know if I came out of the movie with any more knowledge about Reagan, the actual man, who he was.
Or like what makes him tick, like the kind of,
Exactly. Exactly.
Rad, we should say like Reagan, the movie, was directed by Sean McNamara. He's a filmmaker who's worked a lot in the Christian market. He claims to be a registered Democrat. He says he wanted to make a nonpartisan movie. Was this movie successful at being that?
I mean, sure. Wow.
I
mean, first of all, I want to say, I think this movie was successful in general because I had a blast. Okay. I just want to put it out here. I do love a movie that is so blatant with its intentions and with its manipulations that it becomes fascinating. I mean, you talk about Jon Voight, like the performance Jon Voight is giving here. Yes, he's reciting a Wikipedia page, but to frame it with him is wilder than his performance in Megalopolis, and everyone's calling and talking about how that's wild. Right? Like all of this is insane stuff. But as opposed to like, as in terms of like, Sean McNamara being a Democrat, sure. I mean, I'll take his word for it because I don't know that a lot of the issues that this movie deals with are necessarily bipartisan issues. I mean, the movie, it hates commies, it hates Soviets. So does Biden. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you
don't get anything more. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the movie celebrates what, like how Reagan was able to shut down those student protesters. That's what the Democrats are doing right now. That's what Justin Trudeau's doing. They're vilifying student protesters today. So like this doesn't feel non-bipartisan or bipartisan to me in that sense, right? Or partisan, as it doesn't feel like it's part of the kind of the Republican Democrat divide. I think if you were to feel that it is kind of
nonpartisan,
swaying towards the Republicans, it's because of this attack on Hollywood, and it's because of, as Adam said, Hollywood being a liberal Democrat town, everyone being in the bag for Hollywood. I mean, like the biggest thing about this movie is how Reagan came out of Hollywood, but then stood up against the labor movement within Hollywood, stood up against Hollywood being puppeteered by these manipulative commie forces and Hollywood, trying to brainwash the mass public. He was like the righteous defender of that. So, that's a subject that Republicans and the Bible Belt will be drawn to. That's a subject that Dennis Quaid and Jon Voight will be drawn to. And that's a subject that a religious filmmaker who has to work outside of the Hollywood system, the whole Christian market exists outside of Hollywood. So all of them will kind of rally around something like that because Hollywood doesn't make room for them.
Adam, it's worth noting that you believe that actually the greatest depiction of Reagan on screen is this one.
Here's how we do things. The red countries are the countries we sell arms to. The green countries are the countries where we wash our money. The blue countries are the...
Excuse me, Mr. President, sir?
Yes?
It's your 11:30 photo opportunity, the little girl who sold the most Girl Scout cookies.
Damn! Okay, let's get it over with. Everybody out. Come on, move. This is the part of the job I hate.
The late, great Phil Hartman playing Ronald Reagan on Saturday Night Live. This is 1986. Adam, what does this comedy sketch tell us in like 5 minutes that this 2.5-hour movie can't do?
Well, it tells us it takes a great Canadian actor to play Ronald Reagan, first of all. You know, Phil Hartman, maybe the greatest SNL cast member of his era, if not of all time.
Wow, you're just going to say that. Great. Continue.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
Written by Jim Downey, a writer who was never into easy applause, recently brought back into the consciousness through the Conan O'Brien, Jeffrey Epstein jokes on the podcast. That's Jim Downey. Mm-hmm. Although he wrote it with Al Franken, who actually ran as a Democratic politician. So there's a bipartisan coalition for you. And it took a great angle on the idea of Reagan being disingenuous, which is that the doddering, friendly, old persona was someone who knew what he was doing. Mm-hmm. The hyper competence is the joke. If you watch the sketch, he's like speaking flawless German and balancing the budget in his head and telling his staffers what to say when the cameras are off. Yeah. That's projection. I don't think the point isn't that he's secretly brilliant. The sketch is what a funny fantasy that this guy is a genius. But what it's really saying is, of course he knew what he was doing. There's a part in the sketch where he's like, of course I knew about Iran-Contra, just say that I didn't. It's a sketch that kind of, in a good way, doesn't get applause and doesn't get laughs and doesn't cater to the SNL audience, but it gets its shots in, and it's just funny. And this movie is like watching a Saturday Night Live sketch that's been hit in the head, because it's also like watching sketch comedy, except most of it's not trying to be funny. It's kitsch. Yeah. And when you mention John Voight, I mean, everything Rad was saying, I mean, John Voight's narrative is of left to right radicalization. He was an activist in the 60s and 70s. He started Coming Home for God's Sake, which is one of the great anti-war movies by Hal Ashby in that period. Him, Heston, Reagan, it's a very similar trajectory for all of them. So I think this is a homecoming for him, and the catharsis that Voight must feel playing a communist, an ex-KGB agent whose every other line of dialogue is, if you need to know why we failed, it's this guy. He tore down the wall piece by piece with his bare hands, you know? I mean, he must feel great doing this. Yeah. And that movie, I think, is going to be really cathartic for one set of viewers. But as Rad was saying, it's very cathartic for another set of viewers because the movie is hilarious. It's hilarious.
I will say what's cathartic for me is you doing a John Voight Russian impression. That was just the highlight of my day. If folks
I appreciate it.
Anytime, man. If folks are just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. The group chat is here. Rachel Ho is here. Rad Simonpillai is here. Adam Nayman's here. Okay, we are going to move on because we are back with this rowdy bunch.
Okay, podcasters, we have a fabulous cast.
I'm Eugene Levy.
I'm Eva Longoria.
Oliver, this is Zach Gallifrey.
Oh, yes, Zach Gallifragilistic, of course. I see what you're doing. I happen to have started the second highest grossing comedy of all time. Are you the little boy from Home Alone? What have they done to you?
That is a new clip from the 4th season of Only Murders in the Building. It stars, of course, Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. If you're not familiar with the show, let me just set it up for you in a sentence. Those three play true crime podcasters in New York who always seem to become suspects in actual murder investigations. This season, the action has moved into Hollywood because their podcast is being adapted into a major motion picture, which means there are just celebrity cameos everywhere you look this season. Rachel, I'm going to start with you on this because you've been a fan of the show from day one. Why do you keep returning to Only Murders in the Building?
Because it is the lightest of light entertainment, and it's done well. It makes you feel good. There's no heaviness afterwards. It's entertaining. Like, it's kind of exactly what you want from a show that when you just really want to turn off. You don't want to think about anything. You don't want to think about how miserable the world is. You don't want to be reminded of, the presidential election, things like that. Yeah. And I think that they've done a really good job with, with making that entertainment. It's thrilling. I enjoy kind of seeing how everything evolves. I love seeing Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Selena Gomez together. I think it's just really well done popcorn television.
Yeah, I think sometimes when a show does joy and does it well, I think we need to like celebrate and elevate that a little bit more. Rad, you hate joy, but you're watching the season. In this new season, the crew goes to Hollywood. You get all these celebrities who are going to kind of come into the fold. We've heard in that trailer Eugene Levy. You've heard Eva Longoria, Zach Galifianakis. They're playing the three that we know. Does it work? Does that device work?
I mean, look, I think that device is a dead giveaway that they're running out of ideas, right? Like, I mean, clearly, as soon as they start like shoehorning in celebrity guest cameos, like that kind of stuff, it's to distract from the fact that there's a hollowness here. We have no story left to tell. I mean, it worked for Deadpool and Wolverine, right? Like that's what they do. Okay, so, but in this situation, like what we have here with this new episode, with where this new season's going is, it's kind of like Scream 3. When Scream 3 goes back to the set of the movie that is depicting the previous Screams, and like they're just kind of doubling back and returning to the same old territory because they got it. Like what else we got, right?
Yeah.
And what was interesting about Scream is because remember, Scream started off as a meta narrative, as in the same way that Only Murders in the Building was. Like Only Murders in the Building, like Scream, it's there's a murder unfolding, but we're narrating the narration of the murder. Mm-hmm. And now we're in season 4, and there's a movie being made about the narration of the narration. Like we're gone down the rabbit hole right here, right?
Because it's fun, Rad. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Sure. But I mean, no, and here's the thing, that clip you played, I love that clip you played. I love it because I'm glad they finally got Zach Galifianakis' number with Martin Short being like, yeah, who are you? Like, sorry, you were in that one hit and somehow that bit that was never funny to begin with, just kept living for years upon years in between two ferns. They won me with that.
I did not expect Zach Galifianakis to be catching strays this morning, but you know what? I should have known. Rachel, is this new premise for season 4 working for you?
I agree with Rad. Like it is a bit annoying seeing all these guest cameos coming in and coming in. It kind of distracts. But then again, it distracts from what? It's the same formula. It's the same season. Like it's the same thing over and over again. Yeah. Thought it was fun, though. I like seeing Eugene Levy. Like, it was just enjoyable, Sure. Eva Longoria had some good, funny bits in there. I like the whole Martin Short doesn't know who Zach Galifianakis is. Like, it's all fun. I don't know. I'm not a killer of joy like Rad, so I feel like it's just a good time. And it's a bit dragged on at this point, but I still think it was comical, and I enjoyed it. That was a good 45 minutes of just watching some nonsense television.
I'll tell you who's been suspiciously quiet is Adam Nayman, who has not watched Only Murders in the Building. Adam, what has kept you away from the show?
We were talking about Saturday Night Live. Do you know the 5-timer sketches?
I do.
Where Steve Martin and Martin Short stand there and talk about how incredibly famous and successful they are, and other famous and successful people join them,
hosting.
And they all kind of they famous and successful each other sort of to death. That's what I always assumed that the show was. Now, the good thing about that is when people like that are funny, they're worth watching.
Yeah.
And it does have, now Meryl Streep on it, who I've heard is worth watching. She's kind of a well-known actress. And I think that the pleasure of watching these people be light and funny and kidding themselves has a very honorable tradition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Bob Hope used to play himself. The SNL is a history of people playing on their persona. And as Rad was saying, the meta narrative thing might be annoying, but it's also the currency of the moment. I mean, everything is a commentary on everything. So in the spirit of joy, I watched the first episode of the 4th season without having watched the previous 3 seasons. And a lot was happening. And I did like the idea that they go all the way to Hollywood to see New York recreated. Not as good as the same joke in a Toronto movie like Scott Pilgrim, but still funny.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that it's charming and funny, but the problem is I really need to be reminded of how crappy the world is. So I'm okay. Good.
Adam's like, I will sit in the darkness on your behalf, everybody. And
what I'll watch is Martin Short do Jiminy Glick, which is the funniest thing in the world.
That's a recurring character on Kimmel, is it? Is that where it sort of recurs?
Well, no, he started it himself. And if you've ever seen Jiminy Glick in Lalawood, where he plays David Lynch as the narrator, which is the only good David Lynch impression I've ever seen, Martin Short's brilliant.
Yes, he is.
And Steve Martin's brilliant. And Meryl Streep is brilliant. Selena Gomez is really talented. I mean, everything Rachel was saying about it being enjoyable and light, I mean, you can't not agree. So I was happy that I watched that 45 minutes, and I will get back to it the next time I'm on a show where people are like, we have to talk about Only Murders in the Building.
I know. I thank you for your service. Okay, we have a few minutes left. I want to talk about this.
Alors, on me dit que ta dernière journée ici, c'est ça? Billet pour Winnipeg, s'il vous plaît.
On va discuter de ta nouvelle vie.
That is just a little bit of Winnipeg director Matthew Rankin's movie, Universal Language. It premiered at Cannes last spring. It has its North American premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. That's just in a week or so. Look, this week we learned that Universal Language has been chosen as Canada's entry for Best International Feature in next year's Oscars. Rad, we just played that clip of a bit of French dialogue, Universal Language. This is a bilingual movie, but the languages are not French and English. They're French and Farsi. What is going on in this movie? What's the thing that makes it unique, you think?
I mean, so this movie is set in this kind of magical liminal place where like Winnipeg and Tehran have somehow merged together. Okay. And it's about, so basically it's a place where Persian tea is served at Tim Hortons and the kids are either dreaming of being diplomats or raising donkeys. Like that's
those are the options.
Yeah. And look, it's a really lovely movie about different disparate people trying to find connection, not just connections across cultures, but across these kind of liminal spaces, across these voids. It's a movie that definitely feels like it was born out of the pandemic in terms of this kind of yearning for human connection, but it also it's a movie that merges like the Winnipeg film group style to kind of the earlier film of Abbas Kiarostami and Jafar Panahi. So that language is very much in play, the cinematic language on top of the merged, spoken languages. And, I think, especially in these times when you were feeling a certain Islamophobia consistently rising in this country, there's something like this where this feels like a real bomb and we need the connection that it's having to offer. And look, it was one of the three features out of Canada that played Cannes. It was my favorite there. It's still one of my favorite movies of the year.
I've heard nothing but just praise for the movie. Adam, when you think about this movie, why do you think it was chosen to be Canada's Oscar contender?
For a lot of what Rad said, and to return to the theme of joy, this was my joy this week. Because it's not a movie that denies that the world's a tough place, but it finds things in the world that I find more joyful than celebrities playing themselves. It's a movie that has this wonderful idea, this wonderful sense of possibility and community and solidarity while making great fun of Winnipeg. There's one scene where there's a tour guide taking people around, and it's like someone had trouble parallel parking here in 1958. And it's also a movie that does something really interesting with English Canadian pop culture, which is it pretends it doesn't exist. Right? English Canadian culture is the structuring absence in the movie. You're in a Winnipeg that's been sort of recolonized in the movie by two different sets of non sequiturs. And what Rad was saying, I think, is such an important point, which is not just the Winnipeg Film Group and the guy madness of it, but the references to 90s Iranian cinema, which is some of the most important movies and beautiful movies ever made. He's not stealing from them and he's not appropriating them. He's trying to talk to them through how he's making this movie. I thought this movie is beautiful and I really like it. I think it's the best thing Matthew Rankin's made, and he's made some other good things. So it's chosen for all those reasons, on top of which it's good. And I will watch the Oscars, hopefully rooting for it, because I liked it a lot.
Rachel, I want to give you the last word here. When you consider the sorts of movies that are usually selected to represent Canada at the Oscars, what does this selection tell you about where Canadian film is right now?
I'm always endlessly fascinated with kind of like what is a Canadian film, especially what gets submitted to the Oscars.
Yeah.
It's usually been French Canadian movies. Deep and Meta kind of broke the mold on that one about many years ago now.
Yeah.
But I love that this is not just, a French movie. There is obviously a lot of French in it, but I like that it's French and Farsi. The last couple of years, Canada has been submitting things that people might not assume is Canadian because it's not French Canadian.
Right.
But I like that this is French Canadian, but it's also kind of a little bit that international flavor, that diversity that Canada's known for as well.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see this movie. It's at the top of my list when it comes to TIFF, because I'm going to be out there. And also, we should say, Rad, you and I are going to be a part of doing a daily show that tells people what's happening at TIFF, where there's more details about that a little bit later this week.
I'm just going to crap on all the movies at the festival.
And that's why we have this relationship, where I go, I kind of liked it. And Rad goes, yeah, but it was bad. But you know what? You didn't do that as much today. And for that's a delight. Rad and Rachel and Adam, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rachel Ho is a film editor for Exclaim. Rad Simonpillai is a film critic with CBC and CTV. And Adam Nayman is a film critic for The Ringer. They're all joining me from Toronto. That is it for the podcast today. Listen, while you're listening to this, make sure you give us a follow in whatever podcast app you're using. Commotion was produced by Stuart Berman, Ty Callender, Jean Kim, and Jess Lowe. Our digital producers are Carla Antonio, Amelia Ekbal, Shuli Grossman-Gray, and Shell Turingen. Our directors this week are Danielle Grogan and Jane Van Couverden. Our engineer is Sam Hashmi. Danielle Grogan and John Perry were our senior producers, and McKeegan is our executive producer. I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. See you next week.